One of the greatest fears of a mother is that everybody's going on with life and you just hope that your daughter will not be forgotten.
It's burned right into your soul and into your heart and your mind.
I'm journalist Angela Kennecke. I lost my oldest child, Emily, to fentanyl poisoning in 2018. Emily was just 21. Her death was preceded by years of struggle, the struggle of addiction so many families face today. We were just 3 days away from holding an intervention when she died. We couldn't save her.
There's a term called amelioration of grief, and it means that grief takes time, and it will get better only if you put work into it.
In this podcast, I'm grieving out loud with other parents who've lost children and with those currently struggling with the monster of addiction.
I didn't want to go into withdrawal. It was like one of the biggest fears of my life at the time.
You were terrified of withdrawal?
Terrified.
Why?
It is the worst pain, illness, the worst feeling that I could ever imagine having.
I'm also learning from experts in the field on how we can and must do better to treat this disease of the brain.
We treat the addiction and the effect of the addiction, but we're not looking at the pain.
The
root cause.
Today I am joined by Susan Clare. Susan lost her 25-year-old daughter, Sharon, to fentanyl poisoning in July of 2018, just a few months after I lost my daughter, Emily, to the very same thing. And much like me, she looked around for who was doing a podcast out there on overdose and overdose death and grief. And nobody was really there. And she started her own, much like me. So we have a lot in common. And she talks to parents all over the country who have been through this horrific experience. So first of all, Susan, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for inviting me, Angela.
Tell me a little bit about Sharon and what happened.
So Sharon, for all purposes, was a happy, healthy little girl. She was the second of my two daughters. She was very talented. She did well in school. She got good grades. She was in the all-school musical. She was in the chorus. I mean, she was just your regular, everyday kid doing well. She got a scholarship to a college in Philadelphia, and she was gung-ho to be a chemist. She was a chemistry major, and she excelled in school. She had to have a certain grade point average to maintain her scholarship, and she was just doing great. And she, as any college student, loved to go to parties and hang out with her friends. And apparently at one party, a friend of hers was very sad. I guess he had a breakup with a girlfriend or something. And he did something stupid that college students do. And he apparently drank alcohol and he took a pill. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm thinking it was probably like Oxycontin or something like that. And he went to sleep and he basically never woke up. And it was devastating to Sharon. She was beside herself with grief. And I remember her calling me at work and expressing how sad she was and she couldn't believe it. And, in retrospect, I wish I would have been more attentive to her, but I just felt like I didn't understand how hard this was for her. And apparently she just got derailed. Now, I'm not saying that Sharon was any angel. I mean, apparently in high school, she, I think, and they all did, tried marijuana. And she, I had read and looked at some notes that she put together, and she apparently had tried LSD and some other pills, but I cannot help but believe it was just a
phase.
A phase, like in high school.
Did you know about it in high school? Or did you find this out later?
One of her friends approached me and talked to me about it, and they said, Sharon, and I seem to remember them saying Sharon had been taking some drugs or something like that. And I just couldn't believe it. And I did talk to her about it, and she said, oh, Mom, I don't do anything like that. And so I wasn't really alerted to anything in particular. I just thought it, and if she tried marijuana, I wasn't too really concerned about that. And I don't know, maybe in retrospect, I should have been. So apparently, after her friend passed away, and she was just in very heavy grief, and I guess I just didn't recognize it. And we all think in hindsight, right, Angela? We all think, what could we have done differently?
Yeah, over
But
and over again. Yeah.
But apparently, a former boyfriend of hers, who I had trusted and thought was a great guy, and she had broken up with, apparently had a history of some drug usage himself. And I guess he was didn't have a place to live, and he moved in with her. She was living on her own at this time and going to college. And I found a letter that he had written, and apparently he confessed to introducing Sharon to heroin. And yeah.
Our stories are so similar in the fact that our daughters were bright, promising, had very normal middle class upbringing, just nothing you'd ever expect. And you do think, I think because of our age and, maybe what we were like in high school, oh, a little marijuana, whatever. It's not what you want them to do, but that's just a phase that's going to pass. Although now I think I've learned, and I don't know if you've also have kind of think this as well, but that marijuana on the developing brain is just can really set someone up for addiction. If they start that, a lot of people start that way. And I think we're all learning that, right? It's just unfortunate that it took the deaths of our daughters for us to really learn that.
All right. As I said, I didn't think it was any big deal. And, it was something that was around when I was in college. And it was just something that I just never, in my experiences, it was even hard to say the word heroin. I mean, even now, it's just the word heroin, just right, exactly. And it was just something that it was somebody else who did that. There was some other person that had tried it, or it was some big movie star that died from an overdose. I just never even thought that it was be any part of my life.
Right. Because I always had has negative connotations, so much stigma around it. The idea of who's using it and why and how and where. I just think it's something neither you or I would ever go near. So why would we think our kids would? I mean, we taught our kids not to do these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
absolutely.
So it is, but I think I think it's hard maybe for our generation to understand how readily available it is, first of all, in this country now, and how it has, among young people anyway, probably lost a lot of that stigma that we had for it.
Yeah, I think that they're more willing to try different things. And I don't think it had the stigma that it had when we were younger, possibly, but certainly Sharon was in a state in which she accepted it because it was going to relieve her pain. And like with any young kid, oh, like I could try that. That's not a big deal. And it probably made her feel good. And then, so it was a choice. It was a choice on her part to try it for the first and maybe second time. And then that's it.
Right. I think that's what people fail to understand is that this is an acquired disease, just like diabetes can be, not always, not every type of diabetes, but it can be an acquired disease by your lifestyle, how you eat, how much exercise you get, that kind of thing. It's an acquired disease. You have to make the choice to use. And I think that we understand so little about the brain, especially with young people, and why they might make that choice. That leads to so much judgment. And I your very first podcast, you put language to so much of what I feel, as a mom. just the stigma and the how parents are ashamed and they don't want to talk about this, and you feel like it's somehow you're a bad mom because this happened in your family. And I think you and I have a similar mission, and that we're trying to change hearts and minds about this.
Yes, definitely. And I have to be honest, and I still feel some shame about it. I mean, I'm not, running up to people in the street and talking about it. It's I've learned to accept it, and it's shocking to me to see all the statistics and information, and to realize that it is part of our society now, and it's something that hopefully we can, by talking about it, open it up more. And many of the people that spoke to me on my podcast, that was one of the things that they wanted to do as well, is to be able to feel free to talk about what had happened to their loved one, and just sort of get it out in the open, and to sort of embrace it.
Right, without the fear of judgment, right?
Right.
Yeah. So what have you, as you've talked to other parents, what have you learned from them, do you think?
I think that everyone, like you and I, are almost in shock as to that their child had gone in this direction, and that they wanted to, it would have been great if they would have recognized it earlier, that if they could have done more. But, many of them did express that they helped their children, that they did find out about it and they were helping their children through the process, but and that they had brought them to rehab centers. They all had different ways of coping, but it all turned out the same way, in that
Same
they had
results.
overdosed. But I think we have to recognize that fentanyl is a game changer, and that a lot of people in the past who have gotten through this were either out in California where they have black tar heroin and it's not mixed with the fentanyl, or they lived in an age when there was no fentanyl. So they got through this after several years of living to, at a point where they said, I just don't want to do this anymore. And it was coming from them and from their heart that they just couldn't take it anymore. And of course, people did die in the past, but now with fentanyl, they could be into their addiction a year, even less. They're overdosing and they're dying.
One time.
One time.
First time. And so you're right. You're absolutely right. This didn't used to be a death sentence necessarily. Certainly there were people that overdosed on heroin, but the numbers were so much smaller than they are today. And the fentanyl that's out there, I mean, I really think at this point, what I'm trying to do with the charity that I started in my daughter's name is to help people, of course, get partial treatment scholarships and also help people with sober living. But I have come to the conclusion that what we really have to do is much, much, much more prevention at a much, much younger age. I'm talking like starting in elementary school as soon as possible, because I don't think anything we've been doing up to this point has worked to stop kids from trying this. And some of that has to do with, with the undeveloped brain and all of that and the reasoning and the choices kids make. But it's a huge epidemic, just like what we're facing right now with COVID. It's a huge epidemic and it's killing all of our young people. And because of the stigma around it, that's what I feel like the stigma stops more from happening.
Right. So some other things I learned are that people are trying to make sense out of their loved one passing, and they feel a need to start a group like you did, like not a group, but you have a organization to help others. And, even in my own case, even though you and I started these podcasts, I just didn't find a podcast that really addressed what it was that I was feeling. And I just had the crazy thought, well, why don't I start my own podcast?
Everybody does these days.
I know there's a lot of podcasts out there, but and there's a lot of grief podcasts, but they might have talked to somebody whose child or loved one died from an overdose, but it was far and few between. So, yeah.
You made me think about this because oftentimes parents will come up to me and they say, well, I lost a child too. Well, it wasn't from drugs, but I understand how you feel because I lost a child too. That happens to me all the time. And I always say, it doesn't matter what they died from. They died. My child died, but I think because of that, you're right. It's a different kind of grief because of all these extra layers involved with it. You have much more maybe empathy and sympathy if your child died of cancer because nobody's blaming you, the parent, or nobody's thinking your child was bad or wrong because they got cancer, right?
Right. Exactly.
Do you get that too? Does that happen to you too?
I don't talk to many people about what happened to Sharon. I've, especially with COVID, been more kept more to myself. People I work with all know, and they're very, everyone's been extremely kind.
Oh, sure.
And there's a big outpouring, but I'm not like a public figure like you are, so it's not. Yeah.
That can be a burden too. Let me tell you, it can really be a burden, Susan, because everybody knows, and people feel like they either have to say something, and they don't. But it's just it's good and it's bad. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it's people like you who will really help the cause because you're able to have the platform to get it out there.
Well, you're doing your part too. Trust me. I mean, just giving people a voice is huge. Even if you don't have a huge audience, just that someone can tell their story and they know others are listening. That is giving voice to someone is so important.
Right. Especially while you're grieving, you just want people to know what happened. And I always try to start off where they have the opportunity to talk about their loved one and what they wanted for their lives and what did they see in their future, because people forget all that and they only look at that person as the addict. But of course, because it's about grieving overdose death, I want them to also talk about, and what I was always interested in is how did they get into this position, because of my own background with Sharon, not knowing, not understanding, and how did they deal with all that? And then I think people are interested in what happened on the last day of their life and how did they find out? I mean, it's just so emotional. And many people, they're not shy from talking about it. And once they get started, they really want to express and tell what happened. And it's very important to them. And some people have put it on their Facebook and they kind of tell everybody that they know, and it just kind of takes off.
Has it been healing for you yourself to talk to these other parents?
I think so. I think that hearing and knowing that other people are going through the same thing I am, it does make a connection. These are one of the things we talk about with our loved ones who died from addiction, that, they needed to make connections. And I think that's important for us as well in our healing process. So it's hard for me to talk, like my sisters are both very understanding and they talk to me anytime, but they just don't truly understand what I'm going through. So talking to another person, even though it's in a podcast, has really helped me to realize what I said, that other people are going through the same thing I am and they understand. And often I'll hold, just like we did, a little conversation beforehand and after, so that we sort of get to know each other a little bit better than just the podcast.
Right. That human connection and acceptance is so important. So you were a little over 2 years in, just like me. And I often write about this grief journey, that I'm on. And what I've been thinking a lot about lately is acceptance. Like I accept that I feel like I'm out of that, like the whole first year I think is shock. I really do. But I accept that my daughter is not here and she's never coming back. But then also the longing for her. It's just, you'll see someone who resembles your daughter and, you're just like, it just hits you in the heart. Do you have that experience, that longing of just...
All the time. it's like if I'm not distracted by my job or distracted by, I have two grandchildren, all I think about is Sharon. I mean, and only somebody else that's going through this understands what I'm saying. But it is definitely a longing to just want to be with them and hug them one last time and to tell them that you love them.
Right.
So, yes, I absolutely understand that feeling.
And then I think, well, who knows, who can predict how long you and I will live, but I've got, maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 years, however long it is, right? To live with that longing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what bothers me the most is that that longing will never be fulfilled while I'm here on earth. Right. So
Right.
it's depressing.
It is. But also, we can see, and maybe like with our grandchildren, if you have grandchildren one day, it's the cycle of life. And I think that no one is prepared for death. And I know this was our child, but death is a part of life.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to philosophize about it. And I also do believe that our time on this earth is so short, and we'll see them one day. And I believe that I will see Sharon one day. So it's not going to be unfulfilled, this longing that she'll be part of my life again. Because I think we just keep going on.
Well, we do keep going on. Well, I mean, at least here while we're on Earth, we keep going on because we don't have a choice, right? I mean, because everybody has a choice, but you need to keep going, even and to live with that grief and to find a place to live with it. I think that's what I think a lot about is how you make room for grief and you live with it every day. Yet you keep doing the same things. You go to work, you see your other kids, your other daughter, your grandchildren. You do all the things. You do this podcast. You're not laying around in bed crying, right? But you just, I don't know, you make room for that grief in your heart. How do you do that?
Right. Well, I try at times because it's so overwhelming to just distract myself. And that could be that I watch a movie or read something, listen to podcasts, and it's just to help me and to relieve me of this constant grieving and, to kind of get lost in it. And like I find sometimes that after I'm done, the realization comes back that Sharon's not with me. And, people would say, and Angela, I'm sure you've gotten this too, oh, it's been 2 years. I mean, no one's ever said that to me, but I feel that after 2 years, maybe things, and it has gotten a little bit better. I think that, yeah.
Yeah, not better. I think I would use the word it's you've learned how to manage it, right? And it's not as intense. Like the initial shock and the initial grief is so intense. It's overwhelming every day. Like you don't even know how you could even get up and go to work initially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the intensity wanes, but it never leaves you. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. And, my mom passed away and I grieved her death, but it was just nothing ever, not even close compared to what I'm going through now.
Well,
And it's like, and it's not something you can really talk to about people that are not going through it because it's just not the same thing. They don't understand. So, it's just, I did go through counseling and I have joined some groups. There's a GRASP. I'm sure you've heard of GRASP group, but I felt like it wasn't helping because it was it didn't wane or it didn't make things better. It just, people just kept mulling over and over and about their loved one dying. And I want to progress. I want to kind of get out of this feeling, and I don't want to just keep languishing into that.
You know why? Because you're a bouncer. I have this analogy, and I know this about you, that you are a bouncer. I always say everyone gets thrown into the pit, and I'm not original for this. I heard this somewhere along the way, and I can't tell you where, but that everyone gets thrown into the pit. it doesn't, different shapes and sizes and colors of pits, right? We all get the pit of despair at some point. Something bad happens in our lives. And some people at the pit, they're splatters. They just splatter on the bottom and they can never, ever rise out of that pit. And some people are bouncers and they eventually can bounce back up out of the pit. And I think we do have somewhat of a choice. But yes, you can get into these groups of other people who've lost kids in the same way or different ways or whatever. And it seems like they're just down in that pit and they're just reliving it and talking about it and just focusing constantly on the loss rather than trying to do something productive or have to have purpose in the pain, right?
Right, exactly. In fact, I just published my latest podcast, and this woman just lost her son in August. And she reached out to me, and she really wanted to tell Mason's story. Her son was 22 when he passed away in August. And I thought that it was kind of too soon, this only being a month away, but she really insisted. And she told me about a group that she's been going. It's not a group, it's one-on-one now with, I guess, because of the COVID, but usually it's a group. So it's a group, and it's just a grieving group. They use a manual, and it's not just for people who've passed away from an overdose. It's anybody who's lost someone. And she says it's been helping her to move forward.
Wow.
So I don't know. I was thinking of looking further into that, but it sounds like something in which you're just not talking about it over and over again, but that you're doing something to kind of get yourself out of the grief. Even though it'll never leave us, just the thought is that, it'll help us to cope.
Right. Helping to cope. And I think helping others takes the focus off your own pain. When you're always looking at yourself and your own pain, that can be unhealthy. So I think helping others, and I do that in my way, and you do that by letting other people tell their stories on your podcast. That really helps other people and helps you at the same time, right? So I think that's the best we can do, is to be of service, and to not let this incident define us or our children. I think that's what you're allowing too, is letting people tell just about their child and what they were like, and not to be defined by their death.
Mm-hmm. And this therapist I went to see for a while, she said to me, and I think this rang true, and hopefully I don't come across like this. She goes, she commented that people might view me as being a sad person. And she was telling me about another therapist that she worked with who also lost a child. And she says that she was very sad, and she would kind of approach her day that way. And I don't want to be that sad person. I don't want people to pity me. I don't want to have people feel sorry for me. And so maybe I am the bouncer, but I can't also not recognize what I feel inside, which is sadness, but I just keep trying to move on. I've recognized too, it's hard for me to laugh at times. And it's, I laugh and I smile, but sometimes that hearty laugh, it's just hard sometimes to feel that. But, I'm moving on.
I think that's because, and I have a dog really barking. I think that's because your child's death seems to rob you of joy. I really do. I think you feel like you've just had the joy snatched away from you.
Right.
Maybe it slowly comes back, or you find joy in the moment. Being in the moment probably has helped me the most. Staying in the moment rather than thinking about the past or what could have been. Right.
Right.
But I
do.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, you could really beat yourself up about the past and not accepting what had happened and what you could have and should have and would have done if you were to do it over again. But I have a little note that I have by my desk where I work, and it basically says, you did the best you could at the time with the resources that you had. And I try to remind myself that I was a good mom, and it was unfortunate what happened to my daughter, and this time is going to go on.
Yeah, I love that. I think we should end with that, because that is a really nice thought to end this podcast with. So thank you so much for
You're welcome.
sharing Sharon's story and so many others. We're going to put a link to your podcast on our notes, our show notes here as well. So really appreciate it. And
Thank you, Angela.
I hope we stay in touch because we have a lot in common.
Okay. It's a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you for doing everything that you're doing.
You're welcome.
Thank you for joining us. For resources for families and how to get help, just go to Emily's Hope at paintingapathttorecovery.org. If you found this podcast helpful, please consider giving us a positive review. Thank you.